Hey everyone! Thanks for checking out my PS4 retrospective for 2018. Like always, we're going to go through all of the exclusive games. At least this time we're going through every exclusive game. I think most of them are notable, so I'm going to go through all of them. There were about 40 exclusive games, physical exclusives anyway, released this year for the PS4. Quite a few good things, which I think is a bit less than previous years. A lot of stuff that would usually be multi-platform was released on the Switch as well, as that gains popularity. A lot of Japanese games going out over there. And even the Xbox is getting a ton of multi-platform stuff that usually wouldn't be multi-platform, so I'm not sure quite why that's happening, but yeah, definitely interesting to know. I'm not going to go through PSVR titles. I'm going to do a different retrospective series for those because I want to call those out separately, and I don't want to bog this video down with people that don't have VR, but definitely some of that stuff coming up. So let's get into it with the first platform exclusive. This one came out on Vita as well, but I think most people wanted to play it on the PS4. That is Digimon Sleuth Hacker's Memory. This was the follow-up to the original Sleuth, and it has the player controlling a new character and focusing on a new storyline. The player can interact with characters from the original game, and it adds a bit more to the story from that game, but yeah, it's its own thing. There's over 340 different Digimon in the game, most of which you can recruit and use in your 3 Digimon battle party. Following that, a game I was super hyped about. It didn't quite live up to my expectations, but I know some people really dig it. That is Dissidia NT Final Fantasy. This is the Super Collector's Edition one, which is why the box is, you can't really tell what it is, but yeah, this came out in 3 editions. It's the third game in the Dissidia series, which is based on the Japanese arcade game that was developed by Team Ninja. The game features a total of 28 characters. They're all taken from the 15 main games in the series, but there's also a character from Final Fantasy Tactics and Type 0. The battle system is completely different from the original PSP games, which is what kind of turned me off. Those were a lot more like floaty 3D anime fighters, while these new controls actually feel a lot more like Gundam Versus. That's a huge arcade game in Japan, and since this was an arcade game as well, I think they modeled it that way. Like the original games, you have Brave and HP attacks. Brave attacks deal less damage, but they build up your bravery. While HP attacks do damage based on the amount of bravery you have, so it's that typical thing of build up your bravery and then attack with your damage attacks. Characters are divided into different classes, including Vanguards, Assassins, Marksmen, and Specialists. They each have different strengths and weaknesses. The matches are 3-on-3 battles, and if you play single player mode, your 2 companions are controlled by the AI. Story mode has you moving around a map, taking on challenges to unlock cutscenes, and there's your traditional fighting modes. Overall, it's just a cool bunch of Final Fantasy fan service in a fighting game. I prefer the original battle system more, but it's still cool that this came out on consoles. And next up, a remake that a lot of people were looking forward to, Shadow of the Colossus. It's basically a complete remake of the PS2 classic action-adventure, which just brings some beautiful new visuals to the original game. But everything else is pretty much exactly the same. For a lot of people, the HD remaster was enough, and this didn't change quite enough to make it worthwhile, but it's still cool and worth checking out, especially if you haven't played either of the previous releases. For better or worse, the controls are exactly the same as the previous game. That's a bit of a shame because that's one thing that could have used some improvement, and there's not really any new content except for new collectible coins and a time attack mode. Following that was Blackhole Complete Edition. This was an update to the 2015 PC 2D platformer, where your spaceship is sucked through a black hole and you have to explore the planet you end up on. This complete edition includes the 2 add-on packs, which added prequel and sequel story missions, and brings it to over 90 levels. So the only physical way to get this game is a decent game. There's a pretty funny storyline with full voiceover, interesting and worth checking out if you're into retro-style 2D platformers. After that was the 7 Deadly Sins Knights of Britannia. This is based on the pretty recent 7 Deadly Sins anime. It's very similar to other Bandai Namco published anime fighter games, an arena-style fighting game with 1-on-1, 1-on-2, or 2-on-2 matches. The mechanics are fairly simple, I think even for this kind of game. It's got 20 playable characters and some have multiple forms. There's an adventure mode where you travel along a map and complete battles, which get you rumors that send you to new missions. Aside from just the fighting missions, there's also missions where Elizabeth goes out and collects items that mix things up a bit but aren't really great. You can also get items to upgrade your characters in adventure mode, and the game features a duel mode, which is the standard arcade-like mode. Following that, another fighting game, but this time a 2D fighter, Under Night In-Birth EXE Latest. The latest version of a 2D Japanese doujin fighter by the developers of the cult fighting game Melty Blood. This game includes the largest roster yet with 20 characters, which include the new characters Phonom the Sharanti, Mika Returna, Guyan Enkidu, and Erica Wagner. If you're into niche fighting games, maybe worth checking out, but there's so many fighting games this year, it's hard to really stand out. Next up is Shiny, an average 2.5D platformer where the player controls the robot Shiny, who explores 20 levels, saving other robots. In the game, everything you do uses up your energy, so you have to find batteries and generators to continue on. Then another big remake for the year I was really looking forward to, the Secret of Mana remake. I think this physical version was exclusive to GameStop. This is a complete remake of the classic SNES multiplayer action RPG, which was a must-play at the time. Just a great RPG to play with 3 players. The graphics have been completely redone in 3D, but the game retains its top-down view. It is a little tight, which is my one complaint. I wish the camera could zoom out a bit more, but yeah, it's true to the original anyway. It's not quite as special as the original. The graphic update is interesting, not quite better. The music is cool too, but so was the original. It is just a blast to play this game if you can't get your hands on the original, and to play it to compare and contrast. It's a good game on its own, but you know, that original game design was janky years ago, so it doesn't quite hold up with how true this remake is. Following that, a trio of budget games I'm just going to put together. We got Island Flight Simulator, 3D Mini Golf, and 3D Billiards and Snooker. So yeah, just physical exclusives that were released by Pqube, all on the same day, and with titles that pretty much describe exactly what they are, so I don't think I need to say more about that. Then a Suda51 game I didn't even know about until the remaster was announced, the Silver Case 25th Ward, or I believe it's the 25th Ward Silver Case. This follows last year's Silver Case remake, and this was originally a phone game sequel that was only released in Japan. The game takes place in the newest 25th Ward of the city, and it's 7 years after the original game. It's got new characters solving a new series of murders, so you could kind of dive into it if you didn't play the original. The original mobile release of 25th Ward was different from the original design for Silver Case, but because this remake is based on the Silver Case remake, it's a lot more similar. So if you played through Silver Case and want some more of that, definitely worth checking out. Then, the latest game in a series that doesn't get enough love in my opinion, but definitely worth it, Yakuza 6 Song of Life. This was marketed as the last game in Kiryu's storyline, who was the main character in the previous games. The game brings it back to a single playable character, and follows up on the crazy ending from Yakuza 5. In this game, Kiryu has to take care of a baby while searching for his kind of adoptive daughter Haruka, and he gets wrapped up in a huge conspiracy surrounding a mysterious Yakuza group in Hiroshima. Gameplay is similar to the newer Yakuza games, so it's got that open world city districts you can explore, tons of mini games, a fluid fighting system that's been improved over every title. New side quests include getting cats for a cat cafe, going in internet adult chat rooms. There's a clan mode, which is a big deal. These kind of strategy fights where you build up a clan and send them out after other people in a series of battles. And yeah, new playable arcade games. So you've got your classics, Outrun, Super Hang-On, Space Harrier, but now you've also got Puyo Puyo and Virtua Fighter 5 Final Showdown in the arcade, so that's neat. Yeah, it's kind of hard to recommend this if you haven't played any of the previous ones, but so many have come out this year, you really should play Yakuza 0 or Kiwami. Give it some time if you don't get into it at first. It is one of my favorite gaming series and well worth it. Following that, a game that had its fans, Ni no Kuni 2 Revenant Kingdom. This is a follow-up to the original Ghibli and Level 5 RPG collaboration. It takes place hundreds of years after that first game, The Wrath of the White Witch, and is a completely separate story from the original game, though it does take place in the same world. In this game, the player controls Evan, a prince who loses his kingdom and is fighting to take it back. The gameplay is similar to the original game, with traditional RPG overworld, towns, and dungeons, and a combat system that plays out like the Tales series kind of, where you enter a battle arena and can freely control your character to melee attack and cast spells. You can also use new creatures, which function differently from the original game, so there's some changes here. I don't think it was quite as well received as that original game, and I think that original game was a bit too long and grindy. And we've got other traditional JRPGs coming up, so I don't blame you if you didn't check it out, but if you want more of this kind of game, if you did play through the original, definitely something cool. And after that, Code Realize Bouquet of Rainbows. This is a PS4 compilation of the two Vita games, Code Realize Guardian of Rebirth and the fan disc Code Realize Future Blessings. If you don't know about these games, they're Otomate-style visual novels that take place in a steampunk version of London and stars a young girl who's poisoned. She meets a bunch of historical and fictional figures there, like Lupin, Frankenstein, Helsing, and more. And being an Otomate novel, you probably get to date all of them. The game features new scenarios typical for a visual novel update, as well as new characters. I think this features some new content, some new scenarios. I think when they re-release visual novels, they usually add a bit more in there. So worth checking out if you love the original games. These aren't the kind of games I like to play on a console. I prefer these on a handheld. So I would have gotten the Vita versions if I cared about that. But still cool these are coming out somewhere now that the Vita's dead. And after that, MLB The Show 18. Yeah, just always worth mentioning Sony's exclusive baseball game. Yeah, there's not too much to say about it. It still has the fan favorite Road to the Show mode. It's still a great game for people who love baseball. I'm not a sports guy and I don't really get into these games, so not for me, but I know it has some big fans. Right after that is The Witch and the Hundred Knight 2. This is an isometric action RPG follow-up to the original game. This time a different witch summons the knight to fight for her. The gameplay has the knight switching between 5 different weapons to create different combos for their attacks, so it sounds like the combat is a bit deeper than traditional action RPGs. Then, one of Sony's huge, completely exclusive games for the year, God of War. Big AAA title that a lot of people were looking forward to. No one knew how it was going to turn out, but it turned out pretty great. The latest game in the God of War series is a sequel. We weren't sure if it was going to be a reboot or not, but yeah, just a great sequel. The gameplay has been completely redesigned, the setting is completely different, the characters are so much more evolved, and it just moves the story forward overall. In this game, Kratos has a son, and when his wife dies, they're trying to scatter her ashes. All the while, Kratos is trying to keep his past a secret from the kid who doesn't know. The story takes place in Norse mythology now, with Kratos meeting and traveling through many of the 7 realms dealing with Norse gods. Gameplay is mainly over-the-shoulder melee combat with bare fists and a special axe that can be thrown. His son Atreus also helps out in fights and can be commanded to use his bow or do melee attacks. It's really helpful and good for some puzzle solving. There's a good variety of combat, platforming, and puzzle solving in here. It makes up a pretty great game. And there's also a loot system which you can equip different enhancements on your armor and weapons that you find, and they change things up a fair bit. You have to find materials and craft stuff, but you can get some unique skills and abilities from it. Overall, they really did right by this series. I mean, I'm not a huge fan of the original games. I got really tired of the gameplay in them by now, and the character with Kratos was so one-note. So I'm really glad to see that they actually did something pretty incredible here. After that, a game I will cover in the VR video as well, but it's not exclusively VR, so Megadimension Neptunia VIIR, or I believe you pronounce it Megadimension Neptunia V2R. This was a remake of the pretty recent V2. The game just tells that story again, with the biggest change being a new battle system. The multiple endings were also removed, so you only get one now, and the game features 40 new VR events that unlock as you play through the game, where you invite the 4 main girls to your room and you just have some scenes where they talk to you. They're really fourth wall breaking, they don't really make sense in the universe, but they're interesting and a cool addition to the game. I don't know if I like the new battle system as much as the old one, and I wish the other endings were in there too, so it's not quite the definitive version of the game, but it's a very different experience for a bunch of other little changes, and worth checking out if you're a Neptunia fan. And right after that, another remaster of a PS3 game, but one that's a ton of fun to play with friends, Dragon's Crown Pro. So this update of last gen's VanillaWare 2D beat 'em up has updated graphics for 4K, a new orchestral soundtrack, and it bundles in the previous DLC. Probably not worth checking out if you've already played through Dragon's Crown completely and don't really need more of it, but if you haven't played it, it is a very cool game. It is worth checking out. It's just a good beat 'em up with a unique visual style, and you know, VanillaWare always makes fun games like these. Right after that is Space Hulk Deathwing Enhanced Edition. It's hard to keep track of all the Warhammer games that have come out in the last couple years, but yeah, this is a first-person shooter set in the 40k universe. The Enhanced Edition is an update of the original PC version that fixes a lot of the issues that were there. And it features a single-player campaign and a 4-player co-op multiplayer mode with a progression system, loot, and character customization. There's a new multiplayer class, the Interrogator Chaplain, as well as new weapons, skills, and new enemies. I've heard decent things from 40k fans, but I'm not sure if it's for everyone. Following that is David Cage's next adventure game, Detroit Become Human. This is the game that they spun off from their amazing Kara tech demo from a couple years ago. Worth checking out if you haven't seen that. The game takes place in a futuristic Detroit, and it looks at what happens when automation starts to ruin society, and then what happens when androids become self-aware. Those aren't really new concepts, we've seen them a lot before, and that's the sad thing about this game is it doesn't really tread any new ground. It actually does the bare minimums for that aspect of the storytelling, which is a shame, but pretty par for David Cage. But that aside, don't be influenced by all the hate it's getting, because some aspects of it are really cool. It looks great, parts of it are really well put together, there's some amazing scenes and sequences, some great acting. If you're into these kinds of cinematic adventures, it is definitely worth taking a look at, but if you're someone who's easily turned off by some poor story writing, and some pretty basic takes on complex issues, then yeah, probably avoid it. Right after that was Nobunaga's Ambition Taishi. This is just the latest version of Koei Tecmo's historical strategy sim series, and it's basically the Japanese version of the Romance of the Three Kingdoms series. This one's mostly just for Koei sim fans, but if you're a fan of the Three Kingdom games and have never played a Nobunaga's Ambition title, it's probably worth checking out. Right after that is New Gundam Breaker, which I was happy was coming out over here originally, but doesn't quite seem to be as great of a game as it could be. It's the fourth game in the Gundam Breaker series, and the first to release in North America, and I was pretty excited for it, but it didn't quite live up to its expectations. The series has the player building Gunpla figures, which are little chibi models of Gundams. They're really cute if you haven't seen them. And then you customize them and go into a series of 3-on-3 battles. It's got a new expanded story mode from the previous games, which features visual novel style segments followed by battles. The story has you competing against other teams to complete the main objectives, but there's a lot of story in between fights. During different missions, you also have optional subquests you can complete to get a higher score. The building is fun, but the fighting is a bit clunky. If you're a big Gundam fan, or a fan of Gundam models for sure, check it out. And we got Warhammer 40k Death Watch, so another Warhammer game. This one was a previous UK import, so you could have gotten it a year or so ago from the UK, but now you could get it here, although it may not be worth the price, because it is the port of a mobile game that is quite a bit cheaper and not really that much better than that mobile game, actually. I mean, they've done some improvements with the visuals and stuff, just running on a stronger machine, but yeah, really maybe not enough unless you're a hardcore Warhammer fan. This is a turn-based strategy game that's set in the 40k universe, obviously. It's got a single-player campaign with 40 missions where you play Space Marines taking on the Tyranids. You have over 200 weapons and war gear relics to help customize your squad, so if you're into Warhammer and really want to play a squad-based tactics game, maybe worth looking into. Following that, Fire Pro Wrestling World. This is the latest in a long-running Japanese wrestling franchise that's had very few entries in English. I haven't picked it up yet, I've just played with it a bit, but it's one I do want to pick up if and when it drops in price. The game is based on the New Japan Pro Wrestling League, and it still uses a simpler 2D graphic style that if you're a fan of WWE games, it may turn you off because it looks so simple compared to, the budget that's thrown at those big 3D wrestling games. But don't let that turn you off because it's got a really deep gameplay system that some wrestling fans say make it one of the best wrestling games of all time. It's got a new story mode called Fighting Road that does a good job teaching you about some of the behind the scenes stuff that make up a wrestling match and introducing the characters from New Japan Pro. There's also a championship mode with different match types, including traditional matches, death matches, steel cages, barbed wire, landmine stuff, and MMA style matches. This is also the first game in the series to incorporate online multiplayer, holding up to 4 players in a match. Now, this is definitely worth checking out for wrestling fans. Hopefully proof that the series is selling well, because the 4th one we've gotten in 2 years, Yakuza 2 Kiwami. This is a remake of Yakuza 2 the same way that the original Kiwami updated 1. Yakuza 2 is considered one of the best stories in the series, and that's a series that's known for just having some of the best stories all around, so definitely worth checking out. The game introduces new content that shows what happened to Majima between 1 and 2, and brings back a really important character from Yakuza 0, so we get a lot more of the story from between the games filled in there. It also brings back the Cabaret Club side quest from Yakuza 0, and the Clan Creator side quest from 6, so yeah, more of those strategy battles if you were done with 6. Then another cool niche Japanese game that I didn't even know existed until I saw it on store shelves. That's 428 Shibuya Scramble. Yeah, this is a port of a popular Japanese Wii visual novel. It's told with text, photos, and visuals, and they're all pretty good quality, which surprised me coming from a Wii game. They must have been shot in high res to begin with. The game has 5 protagonists and takes place over a 10-hour period where you play through every protagonist's story 1 hour at a time. You have to change your decisions and learn information in the different stories in order to progress in other stories, so there's a neat kind of mechanic where you change things up and see how it affects the other characters in that hour. It's a really neat take on the visual novel or adventure game format. It takes place in Tokyo's Shibuya neighborhood, and the plot surrounds a kidnapping that all the characters get caught up into. It's worth checking out if you're into visual novels, even if it turned you off that it's kind of a live action one and not an anime one. But if you are into anime stuff, one of the scenarios in the game was written by the Type Moon co-founders, who you'll know as the creators of Fate, so definitely worth checking out for that. And if you dig that, there's an anime sequel series called Kanan, I think, that is a follow-up to that scenario. And then the big traditional JRPG for this year, Dragon Quest XI: Echoes of an Elusive Age. They just announced with the Nintendo Direct that this is coming to Switch, a definitive version that has more cool content on it, so this may be worth holding off if you haven't played it yet. But in general, it's a great entry in the Dragon Quest series, and one I really got into after not being able to get into some of the most recent Dragon Quest titles. We missed out on Dragon Quest X, the Wii and Wii U MMO, but now we're back to a solid single-player experience. It's got the classic gameplay, but it feels way more updated than the Dragon Quest games usually are. The biggest change is the feeling from the new traversal elements. Now you can jump in the environment to get to different ledges and areas, and you can also ride a horse. They're small things, but they really make it feel like it's not the same game again. There's a more exciting story that has actually quite a few great moments in it. You start the game as a kid who grew up in a small village after escaping death as a baby and grows up to discover that you are the reincarnation of the Luminary. So you're sent to take your place in the world and get wrapped up into a whole bunch of different problems. Turn-based battles are pretty much what you'd expect from Dragon Quest. This one doesn't have a class system, which I kind of appreciate because, even though I love the Dragon Quest class system, I get tired of it from every game, so it's good to have them mix it up a bit. And the turn-based battles here are basically exactly what you'd expect from Dragon Quest. If you've been avoiding it because you weren't really able to get into Dragon Quest 9 or 8, they were a little too traditional for you, I recommend checking it out. It is still traditional, but they've done a lot to make it feel new. And after that, another game I'll cover in VR, but is playable without VR, Zone of Enders: The Second Runner Mars. This is an update to the second Zone of Enders game that was released recently in an HD collection. I don't think there's any new content. Everything other than the viewpoint is pretty faithful to the original, including the controls and difficulty, which would have been nice if they updated that a bit. So it's a cool way to play the game. If you have VR, it's a cool way to check it out. But if you didn't like this game before, or weren't really interested in it before, this isn't really going to change your mind on it. Following that, a game I'm ashamed to say I haven't played yet, but yeah, Marvel's Spider-Man. But it's just got a price drop, and I have a feeling that if I wait another month or so, there's going to be a Game of the Year edition coming out soon, and I'll just grab that, because I've heard the DLC is actually pretty good too. So yeah, just so many games are out, I didn't have time for everything, but Marvel Spider-Man just killed it, and even in ways I didn't think it would. The story apparently is so well written for a superhero game, and just really well done. Great characters, great writing, great story, which I didn't expect beyond the traditional superhero storytelling, but this seems to be the year of the Spider-Man with so much great content for that hero. And pretty soon after release, apparently the best-selling PS4 game of all time, almost doubling what God of War has done. So pretty cool that that's such a big hit, and great for Insomniac after their last couple titles didn't quite hit the mark. Like previous Spider-Man games, it takes place in Manhattan, and it's got the great web slinging and traversal that those games are known for, just amped up and made better. Aside from that though, there's a ton of new upgrades and gadgets and costumes that really change up how the combat can work, your different abilities and stuff. It's got a ton of content past the story missions. There's a bunch of different side quests that are, hit and miss, but overall I've heard good things about them. There's a bunch of different gadgets and suits and abilities you get to change up the combat quite a bit, and something I'm just really excited to check out given all the good fanfare and critical acclaim it's gotten. Following that is Black Clover Quartet Knights. So this is another Bandai Namco published arena-style anime fighter, this one based on the recent Black Clover manga and anime, which takes place in a world where nearly everyone can use magic, except for one of the main characters who can't, and so he trains his physical body instead. The gameplay takes the traditional combat mechanics you'd expect from this game and mixes in third-person shooter controls, so it's a pretty interesting mix. It's got a new story for the single-player mode, and has 4-on-4 multiplayer modes, and 14 different characters. Supposedly some neat ideas, but overall pretty rough, and it just doesn't stand out with all the anime fighting games we got this year. A lot of those are going to be mentioned in the multi-platform episode. Following that was Metal Max Xeno, a long-running series that started on the Famicom. It has 6 main games or remakes, 4 spin-offs, but the only one we ever got here was Metal Saga for the PS2. So this is the first time we've heard of it, even though this is kind of a big anniversary release for the series. The game takes place in an apocalyptic future after a supercomputer has tried to wipe out humanity. It's very anime meets Mad Max. It's a turn-based RPG where you upgrade and battle with tanks. You have a 3-tank party, which is pretty cool. It's a bit simplistic and easy, but a neat take on the genre. Then, as if we didn't get enough Yakuza this year, Fist of the North Star Lost Paradise. This is based on the cult manga and anime series, and it's by the Yakuza team, so it takes that kind of gameplay format and works it into this new setting. It works really well, not quite as good as Yakuza, but still cool to see. It's got a really unique visual style, being cel-shaded and following that kind of anime style, and it also takes place in a Mad Max style apocalyptic world. The story is inspired by some of the plot points from part 1 of the manga, where the main character, Kenshiro, is looking for his lost fiancée. This game takes place in the City of Eden, which the player can explore freely, completing story objectives, fighting enemies, and playing mini-games including bartending, baseball, racing, and different retro games. If you know anything about the anime and manga, the one thing you'll know is that the main character uses pressure points to kind of cause different parts of his opponent's body to explode, the head being a big one, and so all those are worked into the game as kind of combo finishers. They're really neat and worth seeing. It's crazy but cool. Following that was Air Missions Hind. This is just a helicopter flight sim that I'm kind of surprised didn't have a VR mode. Just another budget release, and actually I think it's pretty hard to get now. I'm not sure how it was released, so yeah, just worth knowing that came out. Then Kingdom Hearts, the story so far. A game I kind of regret not picking up because I thought it would go cheaper. Instead, it doubled in price. They just didn't put out that many. So yeah, these games just keep getting bundled together. This latest pack includes both Kingdom Hearts 1.5 HD, 2.5 HD, and 2.8 all together. So yeah, just the complete HD, so just everything Kingdom Hearts before 3 in one collection. Although it is just the 2 discs from the 2 previous releases, so you're not really getting anything new. It's just if you want this kind of collection on your shelf for a collector thing, not really worth owning other than that. Next up is Punchline. This is a game I talked about in my VIIR retrospective, but it feels just as home on the PS4. It's a half visual novel, half adventure style game that is really ecchi themed and just silly anime. It's actually based on an anime that I think only came out in Japan, a 12-episode anime that this one I think expands on the story a bit more. It's completely different from the developer's previous visual novels. They do a lot of really serious stuff, so it's pretty crazy to have this one that's full of panty shots and nosebleeds and those kinds of gags. In the game, you play a boy who's been kicked out of his body and trying to get it back from whoever took it. To do that, you have to grow your spirit power to manipulate the environment and use the other residents in your building to complete objectives. Yeah, so you're moving around to the rooms that belong to the different girls in your kind of dorm and getting them to do things that will eventually help you complete your objectives to get back into your room where the imposter is using your body. It's a fun, silly game if you don't mind that kind of content. Because it's got adventure game elements where you explore rooms and try and solve these little puzzles. It feels alright here compared to just a full visual novel. So yeah, definitely worth checking out if you're into those kinds of games. Following that is Heroes Defense, which I've heard is a kind of mediocre strategy game inspired by MOBAs and tower defense games. It features a single player campaign and multiplayer modes. I just haven't checked it out, so I can't really say if it's good or bad. If you have and have an opinion on it, let me know. And following that, maybe just as shameful as Spider-Man, is Tetris Effect. So this was really praised as a VR title, but it's totally fine to play without VR as well. And we get a new Tetris game like every year, so it's easy to write them off, but this one is really something special. It was created by the creator of games like Rez and Lumines, and it takes that kind of psychedelic visual and musical style and just really nails it for Tetris. It is the classic Tetris gameplay, but if you haven't played it since the original, there's a bunch of new kind of tricks and tips that you may not have known about, so you're going to learn a bunch playing this one. It does feel a good bit different. The main game has 30 stages with unique visual effects and music, and really cool experiences throughout, and it uses a new zone mechanic to switch up the gameplay in an interesting way. Yeah, and there's also several classic modes on there to play. If you have VR, worth checking out in VR, but if you don't, still worth checking out, especially if you have like a good TV and sound system. Right after that is Omen of Sorrow, a 2D fighter that doesn't really stand out in a year of amazing fighters. With a lot of the other games we mentioned, like I said, multi-platform, we're going to cover all the other great fighters. This one doesn't stand out, but it is interesting. It has 12 different characters, and they're all horror themed. So they're taken from horror stories and legends. You get stuff like a werewolf, a vampire, mummy, demon, just cool stuff like that. If you were really into games like Bloody Roar, it's probably on that level. And the last physical exclusive or exclusives for the year, definitely worth checking out in my opinion. That is Persona 3 Dancing in Moonlight and Persona 5 Dancing in Starlight. Amazing rhythm games that you should check out. If you're into Persona, you have to. These games were both modeled after Persona 4 Dancing All Night and are great follow-ups to that. It got the same basic gameplay from those games. The story is a bit different. Instead of the big story mode that Persona 4 Dancing All Night had, these two both have a story where the Velvet Room attendants, Elizabeth and the twins from Persona 5, Justine and Caroline, are trying to prove that their team, so the teams for Persona 3 or 5, are the better dancers or the best at handling things in this dance world. So they have a contest where they put the two against each other. The story is just kind of told through these scenes that unlock as you play through songs. So the more objectives you complete in the game, you get to see these little events which kind of explain how things move forward. They were released separately, so you could get them separately, and they were released digitally on Vita, so that's a great place to play them, maybe even a better place to play them because of how the screen is laid out than on a big TV in the PS4. But yeah, this was the only physical release, was the PS4 ones, and this kind of special bundle that came with both games also included a code to download Persona 4 Dancing All Night for PS4, but that didn't get its own disc, which is a shame because I feel like those three should really be put together. But that's just a problem for, collectors like me who really love to have things physically. Each of the games have over 25 songs. You'll be unlocking new songs as you play through the game, and you can unlock costumes and accessories as well to dress up your characters in different ways. There's an almost too expensive amount of DLC. Some of it's great, some of it's not so great, but yeah, if you really play through this whole game and want more, there's a bunch out there. And I just want to mention that the Quantum Dream collection came out this year, so along with Detroit, it comes bundled with those two David Cage games from last generation. A decent package, I would recommend it. I had already picked up
Ever since I was born,
Beyond Two Souls 2-pack
I've been linked to an entity.
years ago, so it's a shame they took so long to bring those out.
His name is Aiden, and he's always with me.
We can find a way to protect you. Found you.
And lastly, just to mention it, there were some code-only games released this year physically. Don't be tricked by these. There's stuff like the Final Fantasy 15 Royal Edition, which is just the same old disc with a code in the box. I think Street Fighter 5 Arcade Edition came out this year. Same thing, it's just the original disc and DLC. Fortnite came out, but that's just a code. And yeah, I mean, that stuff is great if you don't have those games and you just want the disc for cheap, and you get the code bundled in with the extra content. But if you already have those discs, or if you're a collector like myself who just wants the most complete version of a game on the disc, yeah, don't be tricked by those. And that's it for PS4 exclusives. So still a ton of great stuff, a ton of stuff worth checking out. So much that there's a ton I haven't gotten to that I'd love to get to. That's kind of the shame about doing these retrospectives so soon after the year is up, but I really want to do it while all these games are fresh in my memory. So yeah, tons of stuff to check out. If there's anything I didn't know about as a PlayStation 4 exclusive physical game, yeah, let me know in the comments. I appreciate that stuff because it is hard to keep track of this stuff. The lists online are just not up to date this soon after release. If you haven't seen my other retrospectives, go back and check them out. I'm doing lots of previous consoles, but I'm trying to keep up with current stuff too. If you're looking for more recent PS4 recommendations, pretty soon I'll have my multi-platform episode out, which covers games that came out for multiple consoles, and there's a lot of great PS4 games on there too, so worth checking that out as well. Thanks for checking this out. Subscribe to stay up to date on all my retrospectives, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!